Welcome, and thank you for joining me tonight. I hope you enjoy this quiet retelling of The Little Mermaid. Go ahead and get comfortable and let yourself relax and drift slowly into sleep. Far beneath the restless skin of the ocean, deeper than the last wandering ray of sunlight, there existed a kingdom no human eye had ever seen. It lay in the slow, breathing darkness where the water pressed gently against itself, where time moved not in hours or days, but in tides and seasons and drifting centuries. This was a kingdom that had not been built. It had grown, slowly, patiently, over hundreds and hundreds of quiet years. Great coral arches curved upward like the ribs of sleeping giants, layer upon layer of pale rose and ivory and pearl. Columns of stone rose from the seabed, their surfaces smoothed by endless currents, their edges softened by the slow hands of time. Forests of kelp drifted back and forth in endless rhythm, their long ribbons whispering to one another as if the sea itself were breathing in its sleep. Everywhere soft lights glimmered. Pearl lamps glowed faintly inside hollowed shells. Tiny creatures shimmered through the water, leaving trails of silver dust behind them. Even the sand glowed faintly, as if remembering sunlight from long ago. Here, sound moved differently. Laughter softened before it travelled far. Songs unravelled into whispers. Even sorrow learned to float gently, never falling too fast, never breaking too sharply against the heart. And in the deepest hall of the palace, where the ceiling arched high like the inside of a great shell, lived the Sea King and his daughters, 6 sisters, bright as coral blossoms, their hair braided with shells and drifting silver thread, their voices clear as ringing bells. And the youngest, the quiet one. She was smaller than the others, slender and pale, with eyes the colour of storm glass and hair long and dark as ink in deep water. But it was not her beauty that made the others notice her. It was the way she listened. While her sisters raced the dolphins through glowing gardens and practised ancient songs in echoing halls, she drifted alone. Often she would swim beyond the palace walls, past the last glowing anemone, past the oldest statues worn smooth by time until the water grew thin and trembling. Here the pressure lightened, the current slowed, the silence deepened. High above the kingdom, a narrow balcony grew from coral and bone, half ruined, half dreaming, overlooking the distant shimmer of the surface, and there she would rest, floating, letting the water cradle her, listening. Above her lay the surface, a moving ceiling of silver and shadow, forever trembling, forever whispering. She had never broken through it. Not yet, but she dreamed of it. Sometimes, very late at night, when the palace lamps dimmed and even the whales fell silent in their long migrations, sounds would slip through the water. The faint chiming of bells, the creak of wooden hulls, the distant murmur of voices, human voices. They arrived blurred and broken, soft as half-remembered dreams. Yet every time she heard them, something deep inside her stirred. An ache, not pain, not sorrow, something softer, a longing, a wanting with no name. The old sea queen noticed the quiet one. She had lived longer than any tide could remember. Her hair was white as salt, her eyes clouded with centuries of watching the world change. One evening, as pearl light shimmered gently through the great hall and currents drifted lazily through hanging banners of kelp, she called the quiet one to her side. They sat together on a low throne of coral and shell, listening to the palace breathe. "You drift too often to the high waters," the Sea Queen said gently. The quiet one lowered her eyes. "What is it like," she whispered, "to have a soul?" The words seemed to still the water itself. For a long time the old queen did not speak. At last she said very softly, "We merfolk live a long time, my child, 300 years beneath these waves. We sing and wander and remember, And when our time is done," she paused, "we become sea foam, white and quiet and forgotten. We return to the water, and nothing more remains." The quiet one's fingers tightened in her lap. "But humans," she breathed. "Yes," said the old queen, "humans are born with something we are not. A soul, invisible, weightless, eternal. It shines beyond their bodies," she said, "long after the body itself has gone." That night, the quiet one did not sleep. She drifted upward alone, through corridors of dim blue light, past drifting jellyfish that glowed like fallen stars, past silver fish that scattered like thoughts, until she reached the trembling ceiling of the sea. She pressed her palm against it, and for the first time in her long, quiet life, she wished, not to be admired, not to be desired, not even to be loved. She wished to be real. From that night on, she returned again and again. Each evening, when the palace grew still, she rose slowly through the water, letting the currents carry her upward. She learned the moods of the surface. Sometimes it shimmered like molten glass, golden and warm with sunset. Sometimes it darkened like ink, wrinkled by restless winds. She saw the moon ripple across it, stretch and shatter and heal again. She watched clouds wander, stars tremble. She saw ships, great wooden creatures floating on the water's skin, their lanterns flickering like trapped fireflies, their sails whispering softly to the wind. And she listened, to music bending through waves, to laughter softened into echoes, to voices speaking words she could not understand, yet somehow felt. Often she imagined the faces that belonged to those voices. Did they smile? Did they look at the stars the way she did? Did they ever look down and wonder? Her sisters teased her gently, but she only smiled. Because now in her dreams she was walking on pale sand, listening to waves, and always a human voice was speaking her name, though she did not yet know what her name might be. Among the merfolk there was an old law, older than coral, older than the palace itself. A law whispered from mother to daughter, from tide to tide. No mermaid was permitted to rise to the surface until the night she turned 15. Not because the surface was dangerous, but because it was powerful. The old sea queen had once explained it this way: "The first time you touch the air, the world will touch you back." For the surface was not only a boundary between water and sky. It was a boundary between worlds, between those who lived only for time and those who carried eternity inside them. Mermaids believed that the first ascent shaped the heart. What you saw on that night, what you heard, what you felt, would follow you faintly for the rest of your long life. So they waited. They let their daughters grow strong in the deep water, their minds quiet, their hearts unmarked. Only when the 15th year came were they allowed to rise, to look once upon the world of air, to listen once to the voices of souls, and then return. Most did. They returned laughing, excited, full of stories. They spoke of fireworks and dancing lights, of music and warm winds, and the strange heaviness of air. Some said they felt nothing at all, but some came back changed, quieter, thoughtful, as if they had brushed against something they could not quite name. And so, on the night the quiet one turned 15, her sisters came to her. They wove silver thread through her dark hair, they pressed pale coral flowers into her hands, and they sang softly as they guided her upward. "This is only a visit," they reminded her gently, "only a glimpse. You must come back before dawn." Her heart fluttered, not with fear, with recognition, as if some part of her had been waiting for this night long before she herself had been born. She rose alone, slowly, reverently, through drifting clouds of glowing plankton, through water that cooled and thinned around her skin, through currents that seemed to hush as she passed. The surface shimmered above her like living silver, and then she broke through. Air rushed into her lungs, sharp and bright. She gasped softly. The sea parted around her shoulders, and the world opened. The sky stretched endlessly above her, vast and dark and scattered with trembling stars. The moon hung low and luminous, painting a silver path across the waves. Wind brushed her face for the first time, not like water, not gentle and holding, but light, moving, free. She floated quietly, half hidden by the swell, learning the strange weight of air, the cool touch of night. And then she saw the ship, a tall vessel drifting along the moonlit path, its dark sails breathing with the wind, its lanterns glowing warm and golden against the dark. Music drifted across the water, not muffled now, not broken by waves, clear, bright. Human voices rose and fell in laughter and song. She had heard such sounds before, faint and blurred through water, but now they were whole, alive. She drifted closer, and on the deck, among the moving figures, she saw him. The young prince stood near the rail, his face lit by lantern fire, his eyes bright as he laughed with friends, and in that moment something happened, something small, something invisible, something that had never happened before. For mermaids could hear human voices, they could admire human faces, but they could not feel what humans carried, not fully, not until that first breath of air. The quiet one felt it then, a warmth, a strange trembling light moving through the air around him. His soul. She did not know the word yet, but she felt its presence, and it reached her, soft as breath, gentle as falling snow, and for the first time in her life, her heart answered something outside the sea. She watched him for a long time, learning the shape of his smile, the sound of his voice, the way his hands moved when he spoke, and without knowing why. She loved him, not the way stories spoke of love, not yet, but with a quiet, aching wonder, as if she had finally found the voice she had been listening for all her life, the voice she heard in her dreams. Then the night changed. The wind rose suddenly, the stars vanished behind racing clouds, thunder rolled, low and distant. The sea began to lift and twist beneath her. Rain fell in sudden slanting sheets, the ship lurched, laughter turned to shouts, lanterns shattered, lightning tore the sky open, and in the chaos she saw him fall. For a moment the world froze. The prince vanished into black water, and something inside her moved faster than thought. She dove. Cold closed over her. Darkness swallowed sound and flame and storm. She found him sinking, pale and still. She wrapped her arms around him and swam, through crashing waves, through broken wood and drifting fire, through a sea suddenly violent and wild. She did not know how long she swam, only that she could not let go. When at last she reached the quiet shore, she laid him gently on pale sand. She pressed her ear to his chest. At first, nothing. Then a heartbeat, slow, fragile, alive. Relief rushed through her like sunlight through water. She stayed with him as long as she dared, listening to his breath, memorizing the warmth of his skin, and then footsteps, human voices calling through the rain. She hid among the rocks. From the water she watched another girl run to him, watched him open his eyes, watched him smile at someone else. And in that moment, as she sank back into the sea, she understood what she had done. She had not only saved a life, she had touched a soul, and that soul had changed her forever. After the night of the storm, the sea no longer felt like home. The coral halls that had once glowed with warmth now seemed strangely hollow, their soft lights drifting past her eyes without meaning. Her sister's laughter rang through the palace, bright and familiar, but it reached her as if from very far away. She tried to sing with them. No sound came. She tried to drift in the old gardens, to trace the worn statues with her fingertips, to rest upon the balcony and listen. But every place now carried the same quiet ache. Every current whispered the same memory, a human face, a human smile, and the terrible, beautiful thought that he would never know who had saved him. She knew then what she wanted, not simply to see the surface again, not simply to walk, but to stand beside him, to hear his voice without water between them, to look into his eyes and be real. Yet she also knew what stood between her wish and the world above. Old stories, whispered warnings passed from sister to sister, from grandmother to child. Stories of a creature who lived far beyond the borders of the kingdom, the witch beneath the roots. They said the currents around her dwelling twisted backward. They said lost ships drifted there even when no wind blew. They said she traded in voices and memories and pieces of the heart. No mermaid went there willingly, but the quiet one was determined. One night, when the palace slept and pearl lamps dimmed to a faint blue glow, she slipped quietly through the outer gates. She swam beyond the gardens she knew, beyond the warm, singing reefs, past the wreck fields where old ships lay broken and pale upon the sand, their ribs wrapped in weeds, their bells long silent. Here the water grew colder, darker, heavier. The light thinned into green shadow. Forests of dead kelp rose around her, their long black ribbons twisting slowly, whispering as they brushed against one another. The currents no longer moved gently. They pulled, they turned, they circled, as if the sea itself were breathing around a single, waiting place. At last, she felt it. A slow, endless turning in the water, a great whirlpool, wide and quiet, spinning without sound, and at its edge, the dwelling. It rose from the seabed like the skeleton of some ancient beast. Walls built from the ribs of sunken ships, windows made of shattered glass and bone. Long strings of shells and charms hung from its arches, clicking softly together like distant teeth. The quiet one hesitated. Every tale she had ever heard lived here, stories of voices stolen, of wishes granted crookedly, of hearts broken beyond mending. But the image of the prince rose before her eyes, and she swam forward. Inside, the water was thick and green, lit by drifting clouds of glowing algae. Strange shapes moved in the shadows, and then, slowly, the witch rose. Her body was half woman, half something older, her skin pale as drowned moonlight, her hair floating in tangled clouds around her narrow face. Her eyes shone like wet stones at the bottom of a well. "I have been waiting for you," the witch said softly. Her voice echoed as if many voices spoke through one throat. The quiet one trembled. "I know what you heard on the night of the storm," the witch continued. "I know whose life you carried through the waves." She drifted closer. "You wished to leave the sea." The quiet one nodded. "You wish to walk," another nod. "And you wish," the witch whispered, "for something far more dangerous than legs." The quiet one's hands tightened. "A soul," the witch said, smiling. The words seemed to glow between them. "I can give you a human form," said the witch. "2 legs, warm skin, the breath of air." She lifted a small crystal vial. Inside, a liquid shimmered, silver and black and starlight all at once, moving as if it were alive. "But there is a price," the witch said gently. "Every step you take upon land will feel as if you walk upon sharp knives. Your feet will bleed, your bones will burn, and you must never cry out." The quiet one's breath trembled. "And one thing more," the witch continued, her voice lowering. "The voice you used to sing to the sea, the voice you would use to speak his name." She reached out and gently touched the mermaid's throat. "I will take your voice." The quiet one's eyes widened. "You will never speak again," said the witch. "You will never sing again. No one will hear your laughter. No one will hear your sorrow." You will stand beside him in silence, unable to tell him who you are or what you have given. Silence stretched between them. And if the prince gives his heart to another, the witch said slowly, her eyes darkening like deep water, if he binds his life to someone else, if he places his soul beside hers. She paused. The whirlpool whispered beyond the walls. The charms along the ceiling clicked softly together. Then the path you seek will close forever. The quiet one's heart fluttered painfully. At the first light of dawn after his wedding, the witch continued, you will dissolve into sea foam. No body to carry you, no voice to remember you, no soul to follow you beyond the sea. You will become nothing more than pale mist upon the waves. The words fell gently, terribly. Silence spread through the chamber, wide and heavy and endless. The quiet one closed her eyes. At once the sea rose inside her. She saw her sisters laughing in the coral halls, their bright hair drifting around them like ribbons of light. She saw the old sea queen, patient and ancient, her hands folded quietly in her lap. She felt the slow breathing of the kingdom far below, the steady pulse of tides and memory and home. For a moment, she almost turned away, but then another image came. The shore, pale beneath storm-washed stars. The prince lying still upon the sand. The warmth she had felt around him. That strange, trembling light that had brushed her heart, and the smile he had given to someone else, if there was even the smallest chance, even the faintest thread of hope. Slowly, she opened her eyes and nodded. The witch smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, as if she had always known this was the answer. Then we begin, she whispered. From the shadows she drew a long, thin blade, bright and curved like a shard of moonlight. The quiet one did not move. She only lifted her chin. The knife flashed once. Pain bloomed, sharp, bright, brief, and then silence. Not the silence of the sea, not the gentle hush of drifting water, but a deeper silence, an empty stillness inside her throat. Her voice slipped away like a falling pearl, sinking slowly into the dark, lost forever among the roots of the sea. The witch caught it in a crystal shell and closed it with a soft, final click. There, she murmured, it is done. She placed the small vial into the mermaid's trembling hands. The liquid inside shimmered, silver and black and starlight all at once, moving as if it were breathing. Drink this, the witch said softly, and swim toward the rising sun. When you wake, you will belong to the world above. The quiet one looked once more around the chamber, at the drifting shadows, at the whispering walls, at the long, dark road she could never swim back along again. Then, without another thought, she lifted the vial and drank. Fire rushed through her, not heat alone, but light, and breaking and becoming. Her body arched as the potion burned through her veins. Her tail shimmered, silver scales loosening, splitting slowly, painfully, into two trembling human legs. The chamber spun. The whirlpool roared. Darkness folded gently over her sight. And the sea went quiet. For a long time there was nothing, no water, no weight, no sound, only darkness, soft and endless, like drifting inside a dream that had forgotten its beginning. Then, slowly, light, not the filtered blue of the sea, not the pearl glow of coral halls, but something warmer, brighter. It pressed gently against her closed eyes. She stirred, and pain answered, sharp, sudden, everywhere at once. Her breath caught in her throat. She tried to move. The world tilted. A strange heaviness pulled at her. She opened her eyes. Sky. Endless pale blue sky, wide and trembling with morning light. Clouds drifted slowly above her, soft and gold-edged. For a moment she only stared. She had never seen the sky from below before, never felt it stretch so far, so open, so impossibly high. Wind brushed her cheek. She flinched. It was not like water, not holding, not gentle and surrounding. It touched and left again, cool and fleeting, like a wandering hand. She tried to breathe. Air rushed into her lungs, dry and bright and burning. She coughed silently, her chest rising and falling in quick, startled breaths. The sound of waves reached her ears, not muffled now, not distant, real, rolling and breaking and sighing against the shore. She turned her head. Sand lay beneath her hands, warm, rough, grains slipping between her fingers like tiny drifting stars. And then she felt it, the weight, wrong, unfamiliar, heavy and aching below her waist. Her heart began to race, slowly, very slowly. She lifted her head and looked, where her silver tail had always been. There were legs, 2 pale human legs, trembling in the early light. For a long moment she could only stare. They seemed impossibly thin, strange, fragile. She reached out with shaking hands and touched her own skin, warm, soft, alive. A sound rose in her throat, not a cry, not a word, nothing, only breath, only silence. Memory rushed back, the witch, the knife, the burning potion, her voice, gone. A quiet panic fluttered in her chest. She pressed her hand to her throat. No pain there now, only emptiness. She tried to speak again. Nothing, not even a whisper. Tears filled her eyes. But before fear could grow too large, another feeling came. A pull, a warmth. She was here, on the shore, in the world above, near him. She gathered her arms beneath her and tried to sit up. Agony flared, white, blinding, as if knives had risen from the sand itself and cut through her bones. Her breath left her in a silent gasp. She collapsed back onto the shore, shaking. So this was the price. She lay there for a long time, letting the pain fade into a deep, aching throb. When at last she tried again, she moved more slowly, carefully. She pushed herself upright, her arms trembling. The world swayed, the sky spun, but she did not fall. She drew her knees toward her chest. Every movement burned, yet she was sitting. A small, breathless smile touched her lips. She was human. The sound of footsteps reached her ears, real footsteps, on sand. She froze. Voices murmured nearby, human voices. Her heart leapt. She turned her head and saw him. The prince was walking along the shore, his dark cloak wrapped loosely around his shoulders, his hair stirred by the morning wind. He was alive, whole, laughing softly with a companion behind him. Relief flooded her so suddenly that she nearly wept. She tried to rise. Her hands slipped in the sand. She tried again. Pain tore through her legs. Still, she forced herself upright. She swayed and fell. A shadow crossed the light. Warm hands caught her shoulders. "Are you hurt?" a voice said, his voice so close, so real. She looked up, into his eyes. For a moment the world forgot to move. He stared at her astonished. A pale, silent girl lying alone on the shore, her dark hair spread across the sand like spilled ink, her eyes wide with unshed tears and starlight. She opened her mouth, tried to speak his name. Nothing came, only breath, only silence. The prince smiled gently. "You must be a gift from the sea," he said softly. And without knowing why, tears finally spilled down her cheeks. He did not leave her on the shore. When she collapsed into the sand, trembling and breathless, the prince caught her gently in his arms. She felt the warmth of him for the first time, not the distant warmth of a soul felt through water, but the real warmth of skin and breath and heartbeat. He wrapped his cloak around her shoulders, lifting her carefully as if she were made of glass. She rested her head against his chest. The steady rhythm of his heart echoed through her. Alive, safe. She closed her eyes for a moment. She almost believed her wish had already come true. They carried her to the castle at dawn. Great gates opened, voices murmured in wonder. Servants gathered, whispering softly about the strange, silent girl found by the sea. They bathed her in warm water scented with herbs. They brushed the salt from her hair. They wrapped her in pale silk and laid her upon a bed soft as drifting clouds. But when she tried to stand, pain returned, sharp, immediate, unforgiving. As soon as her feet touched the floor, it was as if blades rose from the stone itself. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. Her body shook. The women gasped and hurried to catch her. But she forced herself upright, forced herself to smile, because he was there, watching her with gentle concern. "You must rest," he said softly. She wanted to tell him everything, that she had saved him, that she had come from the sea, that she had given her voice, her body, her life for the smallest chance to stand beside him. She opened her mouth. Nothing came, only breath, only silence. He smiled kindly, misunderstanding. "You are shy," he said, and led her slowly into the sunlight. The days that followed were long, and bright, and filled with pain. They taught her to walk again, down long marble halls, across echoing courtyards, through gardens warm with roses and fountains and birdsong. Every step cut into her, every movement burned. At night her feet bled quietly into the silk sheets. She washed the stains away before dawn so no one would see. She never cried out, she never complained, she only smiled, and followed him everywhere. He took her with him through the gardens, along the terraces overlooking the sea. He spoke to her constantly, telling her stories of his childhood, of storms and voyages and kingdoms, of the strange princess who had found him on the shore. "The one who saved me," he said often, his voice soft with memory. Her heart tightened every time. She listened, always listening. Sometimes he would stop walking and look at her curiously. "I wish you could speak," he said once gently. "I would so like to know who you are." She touched her throat and looked away. At night, when the castle slept, she would slip onto the highest balcony. There, barefoot on cold stone, she would watch the sea far below. It glittered softly in the moonlight, dark and endless and familiar. Home. She would press her hands to her chest and try to feel something new there, something growing, a spark, a beginning, a soul. The witch's words echoed in her memory. "If he chooses you freely, if he binds his soul to yours." So she waited and hoped and loved him silently with everything she had. Then one evening he came to her with joy shining in his eyes. "I have found her," he said breathlessly. She felt the world tilt. "The girl from the shore," he continued, "the one who saved my life." Her heart stopped. "They say she is a princess from the northern kingdom. My parents have arranged for me to meet her." He laughed, bright and boyish. "I believe I have loved her since the night of the storm." The words struck her like knives far deeper than those in her feet. Loved her. Since the storm. Before the potion. Before the pain. Before the sacrifice. She stood very still, smiling, because that was all she could do. Inside her, something began to crack. When the princess arrived, she knew her at once, the girl who had run to him on the shore, the girl who had received his first smile. She was kind, gentle, beautiful, and when the prince looked at her, his eyes shone in a way they never had for the silent girl beside him. They walked together in the gardens, they laughed together in the halls. He spoke her name with warmth and wonder, and the quiet one walked behind them, step after step after step, each one cutting deeper than the last. At night, alone in her chamber, she pressed her face into her pillow so no one would see her silent tears. She tried to pray, but she did not know how humans prayed. She tried to hope, but hope was beginning to hurt too much. Slowly, terribly, she understood. He would never love her. The wedding bells began to ring a week later. At first, only faintly. A distant chime drifting through the morning air, soft enough that she thought she had imagined it. But the next day they rang again, and the next, each morning louder, each evening closer, until the sound filled the castle, until it seemed to live inside the walls themselves. Servants hurried through the halls, carrying armfuls of white flowers. Ribbons were hung from balconies and staircases. Lanterns were polished until they shone like small captured moons. Music drifted through every chamber, gentle music, joyful music, music meant to welcome a beginning, and with every note, the time she had been given grew shorter. She followed the prince through the decorated halls, walking one careful step behind him, her bare feet aching with every movement. He spoke to her often in those days, happily, breathlessly, telling her of the ceremony, of the crown she would wear, of the vows he had practiced in secret. "She is everything I dreamed of," he said once, smiling. The quiet one felt something inside her fold, very slowly in upon itself. Sometimes he would stop and take her hands. "I wish you could speak," he said gently. She looked into his eyes, and in her silence, she told him everything. She told him of the storm, of the dark water closing over him, of the way she had held him through the waves, counting his heartbeats, begging him not to leave the world. She told him of the shore, and how she had listened to his first breath, and how she had left before he opened his eyes, but no sound ever came, only a small, helpless smile, and he never knew that the life he now celebrated was the life she had given back to him, never knew that the girl who walked beside him in silence was the one who had carried him through death. This knowledge grew heavier each day. It pressed against her chest when she watched him laugh with his bride. It burned behind her eyes when she saw him take the princess's hand. She alone remembered the truth, and she alone was forbidden to speak it. At night, in her quiet chamber, she pressed her hands against her throat and tried again, and again, and again, to speak his name, to speak the word love. Nothing came, only breath, only silence. As the wedding drew closer, the pain in her body grew sharper, not only in her feet, where every step still cut like hidden blades, but deeper, in places no wound could be seen. She began to walk more slowly, not because she could not walk faster, but because she was afraid of reaching the end, afraid of the dawn she knew was waiting. The witch's words whispered through her thoughts. At the first light after the wedding, sea foam, nothing, no soul. Sometimes she imagined herself standing at the altar instead, imagined him turning toward her, imagined him finally seeing her, imagined his face when she told him the truth. "I saved you. I loved you before I had a name. I gave up my voice and my home and my life just to stand beside you." But dreams could not change fate, and love could not always make itself heard. On the evening before the wedding, when the castle was full of music and laughter, she slipped away, slowly, carefully. She climbed the long winding stairs to the highest balcony, the same height, from which she had once watched the surface of the sea. The night was warm. Stars trembled faintly above. Below her, the ocean stretched dark and endless, its waves lifting and falling in quiet breath. Home. She leaned against the cool stone railing, and for the first time since she had come to land, she allowed herself to understand. She had not come here to gain a soul, not truly. She had come because she had loved. She had come to save a life, to learn what it meant to choose another above herself, and love had never promised her anything in return. The sea shimmered below, calling, waiting, always patient. She closed her eyes and whispered without sound, "I cannot become what I am not." The words formed only in thought, but they were enough In that moment, the desperate reaching inside her finally grew quiet. The ache softened, the longing loosened its hold. She was still afraid, still grieving, still in pain. But beneath it all, something new appeared. Not hope, not sorrow, peace, a small, fragile peace. And as the bells rang far below her one final time, her heart grew very still. The night of the wedding, the castle did not sleep. Music drifted through the halls until very late, soft and joyful, and full of excitement. Servants hurried past carrying garlands of white flowers. Lanterns were lit along every stair and balcony, so that the palace glowed like a crown of gentle fire against the dark hillside. Tonight the prince would be married, and tomorrow the world would change. Tomorrow, before the dawn, after the ceremony, she would be gone. The quiet one moved alone through the glowing corridors, barefoot and silent. Her feet bled quietly into the pale marble floors, but no one noticed. No one ever noticed her pain. Laughter floated past her. Voices called to one another with happiness and excitement. Everywhere the castle whispered of beginnings, and she was walking toward an ending. At last she climbed the long winding stairs, higher and higher, until she reached the highest balcony. The same balcony from which she had once watched the sea and dreamed of another world. The night air was warm, heavy with roses and salt. Below her, the ocean stretched dark and endless, its surface lifting and falling in slow, patient breath. She leaned against the railing. Tomorrow. She could feel the word like a weight in her chest. At dawn after tomorrow, the witch's words would be fulfilled. Sea foam. Nothing. No soul. She pressed her hands against her throat, where her voice had once lived. Still empty, still silent. For a long time she stood there, listening to the distant music, watching the moon lay a silver path across the waves. Then a sound rose from below. Not music, not wind, something softer, a whisper moving through water. She frowned. The scent of the sea suddenly grew stronger, cold and sharp and familiar, slowly, very slowly. The surface of the ocean beneath the balcony began to glow. Pale blue lights spread across the waves. The water lifted, and from the sea they rose, 6 pale shapes drifting upward through moonlit spray. Her sisters. Their long hair floated loose around their faces, dark and tangled with strands of seaweed and pearls. Their eyes shone with tears. In the hands of the eldest, something caught the moonlight, a knife, long, thin, bright as a shard of frozen starlight. The quiet one's breath left her in a silent gasp. Her sisters climbed onto the rocks beneath the balcony, their silver tails glistening wet in the light. For a moment they only looked at her, taking in her human form, her trembling legs, her silent mouth. And then they reached for her. "You are fading," whispered the youngest, touching her cold hands. "We can feel it already." The eldest lifted her face gently. "We know what the witch has promised you," she said. "We know what will happen after the wedding." The quiet one closed her eyes. "So you have come to say goodbye," she thought, but the eldest shook her head. "No," she said softly, "we have come to save you." From beneath her cloak she raised the knife. The blade shimmered strangely, as if moonlight itself had been folded into metal. "We went to the witch," she whispered. The quiet one's eyes flew open. "We gave her everything she asked for," another sister said, her voice breaking. "Our hair, our voices, our memories of home. She took our songs," the youngest whispered. "She took the sound of our laughter." "But she gave us this," said the eldest, pressing the knife into the quiet one's trembling hands. "This will break the spell." Her heart pounded. "If you strike the prince," her sister said, "before the sun rises tomorrow, before he gives his vows, if his blood falls upon your feet, you will become a mermaid again. You will live. You will come home." The words echoed inside her, live, home. The sea below seemed to rise higher, its waves whispering her name. Her sisters clutched her hands. Do it, they begged. Please. You have suffered enough. Why should you vanish for his happiness? You saved his life, the eldest whispered fiercely. You loved him before anyone else. You are the one who carried him through the storm. You are the one who gave him back his breath. And tomorrow he will belong to another. The knife felt heavy, cold, real. For a moment, just a moment, hope surged through her. She could live. She could return to coral halls and singing currents. She could hear her grandmother's voice again. She could forget the knives in her feet, forget the silence, forget the waiting dawn. She could go home. Her sisters watched her with desperate eyes. Behind her, the sea called softly. Before her, the castle glowed with light and music. Somewhere inside its walls, the prince slept peacefully, alive, because of her. The eldest squeezed her hands. Tonight, she whispered, you must choose. The castle slept at last. Music had faded, lanterns burned low. Only a few scattered candles still glimmered along the endless corridors, their flames trembling softly in the hush before morning. The quiet one stood alone in the shadowed hall, the knife hidden beneath the pale folds of her gown. It lay heavy against her side, cold, waiting. Her sister's words echoed in her memory. Tonight, you must choose. She took one step forward. Pain answered, sharp, faithful. She did not stop. She walked down long marble passages that smelled faintly of roses and wax and joy, past closed doors, past sleeping guards, past windows where moonlight spilled across the floor like pools of silver water. Every step cut into her, but she hardly felt it now. Her thoughts were far away, with the sea, with the storm, with the moment she had held his life against her heart. At last, she reached the tower, the highest chamber, the bridal chamber. A single lamp still burned inside, casting a warm golden line beneath the door. Her hands trembled. For a long time, she did not move. Then, slowly, she pushed the door open. Inside, the room was hushed and soft with shadows. White flowers lay scattered across the floor, fallen from garlands left behind after the final blessing. Silk curtains stirred faintly in the open window, and there, upon the wide carved bed, they slept. The prince lay on his back, one hand resting loosely upon the coverlet. His face was peaceful, untroubled, alive. Beside him the new princess slept as well, her dark hair spread across the pillow, her lips curved in a small, dreaming smile. The quiet one stood very still. For a moment the world narrowed to the slow rise and fall of his chest, breathing because of her. Her fingers closed around the knife. She stepped closer. The blade gleamed faintly in the lamplight. All she had to do was lift her hand. One small motion, one quiet stroke. He would never wake. He would never know. And she would live. She could return to the sea, to coral halls, to her sister's arms. She could sing again. She could forget this world of pain and silence and longing. She could be free. Her hand rose, hovering just above his heart. And then something inside her broke open. Not fear, not doubt, love. She looked at his face, at the curve of his mouth, at the faint line between his brows. She remembered from the storm. She remembered the way he had smiled when he woke on the shore, the way he laughed when he spoke of the girl who had saved him, the way his eyes shone when he looked at his bride. He was happy, truly, deeply, because of her, and in that moment she understood something at last. If she struck him now, she would not be saving her life. She would be destroying his. She would be stealing the happiness she herself had once prayed he would find. Tears filled her eyes. She lowered the knife. Her hand fell to her side, very gently. She knelt, and pressed her lips to his forehead. A farewell, a blessing, a thank you. Then she turned away and left the room. She did not return to the balcony. She did not wait for dawn. She went to the shore, down the long stairways, through silent gardens, out past sleeping gates, until her bare feet touched cold sand once more. Her sisters were waiting. They rose from the water as she approached, their faces pale, their eyes wide with hope. She held out the knife, slowly, without a word. The elder sister's hands flew to her mouth. "No," she whispered. The youngest began to sob. "You did not do it." The quiet one shook her head. Tears slid silently down her cheeks. Her sisters gathered around her, clutching her hands, pressing their foreheads against hers. "We cannot save you now," the eldest whispered, broken. The horizon had begun to pale. The first thin line of silver light was spreading across the edge of the sea. Dawn. The quiet one turned toward the water, toward home. She stepped forward. Pain flared once more. And then something strange happened. Her feet no longer touched the sand. They grew light, numb, transparent. She looked down. Her legs were already fading, pale as mist. The youngest sister cried out. The eldest reached for her, and her hands passed through empty air. The quiet one smiled, softly, peacefully. The sun rose. Its first golden light touched the waves, and her body began to dissolve, not in pain, not in fear, but gently, like frost melting in morning warmth. Her skin became mist, her hair became light, her tears became dew. For a moment, she was nothing but a shimmer above the water, and then she was foam, white, quiet, drifting. Her sisters knelt in the surf, weeping as the waves carried the last of her away, calling out to her, again and again. But the sea only sighed and carried her farther, far above. The castle woke. Bells rang joyfully. Sunlight flooded the windows. The prince rose from his bed smiling, his bride still warm beside him. He went out onto the balcony and looked out at the shining sea. For a moment, just a moment, he felt something stir inside him, a faint sadness, a memory he could not place, a strange feeling that something beautiful had brushed past his life and gone. But then his bride called his name. He turned, smiled, and forgot the silent girl who had walked beside him, forgot the warmth that had once saved him from the dark, forgot the one that had loved him enough to vanish. And the sea kept her. White foam drifted across the quiet waves, breaking apart, gathering again, until even the last pale shimmer was gone. The sisters remained kneeling in the surf long after the sun had risen. They did not move. They did not speak. The tide washed over their hands and receded again and again. The place where she had stood grew empty. Only pale water. Only the slow breathing of the shore. At last the youngest sister reached forward, as if she might still gather something from the foam. Her fingers closed on nothing. "She is gone," she whispered. The eldest said nothing. She pressed her palms against the water, as if trying to feel the place where her sister had been, as if the sea might still remember her shape. For a long while, no one wept. Grief had not yet found its voice. Only when the tide began to pull away from the shore did the middle sister begin to tremble. The youngest buried her face in her hands. The eldest rose slowly. Her long hair clung wet and heavy against her shoulders. "We must go," she said quietly. She would not wish us to watch this place forever. Reluctantly, very reluctantly, they slid back into the water. Their silver tails vanished beneath the pale waves. Before diving, the eldest turned once more toward the shore, toward the sleeping castle, toward the life their sister had loved enough to give her own away. "Sleep gently," she whispered, and the sea closed above them. Far below, the sea kingdom felt the change. The currents moved differently that morning. The coral bells rang without being touched. Fish gathered silently in long drifting schools. The old sea queen sat upon her throne, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes closed. She had known. Long before the sisters returned, she had known. When they finally swam through the great gates, no songs greeted them, no laughter echoed in the halls. The palace lay wrapped in quiet. They told the story slowly, of the knife, of the chamber, of the dawn, of the foam. The old queen listened without interruption. When they finished, she bowed her head. She chose the hardest love, she said at last, and the world is poorer for it. That night, no lanterns were lit in the palace. The singing shells were closed. The currents moved gently through dark halls where one small chamber remained forever empty. And though the sea would go on breathing, it would never again be quite the same. Above the water, the castle woke. Bells rang joyfully, trumpets sang from the towers. The prince rose from his bed smiling, his bride still warm beside him. He kissed her forehead, laughed, stretched in the golden light. Nothing in the world told him that something precious had ended. He dressed, he went to the balcony. The sea shone quietly below, blue, endless, beautiful. For a moment, his breath caught. A strange stillness passed through him, as if the morning had paused, as if the world had almost spoken. He pressed one hand to his chest. There was a feeling there, not pain, not sorrow, something softer, like standing in a familiar place and knowing something important was missing. He frowned, listened, nothing. Behind him, his bride called his name. He turned, smiled, and the moment passed, but it did not leave him, not truly. As the days turned into weeks, he found himself lingering by windows, watching the waves, listening for something he could not name. Sometimes, walking through the gardens, he would stop suddenly, certain someone had called him. No one ever had. At night, half asleep, he dreamed of water. Always water. Cold waves closing over his chest, darkness pressing around him, and hands, gentle hands, holding him, lifting him. He would wake with his heart racing, his breath shallow, certain he had been saved from something terrible, and unable to remember what. Once, he told his bride. "I think I nearly died once," he said quietly. She smiled and touched his cheek. "You are here now," she said. "That is all that matters." And he tried to believe her. Years passed. He ruled kindly. He laughed often. He loved his children deeply. And yet, sometimes, standing alone at sea's edge, he would feel tears gather without knowing why, a grief without a face, a love without a name. Once, many years later, a travelling singer came to the court and sang an old song of the sea, a song of storms and mermaids and a girl who loved a prince too much. The prince listened, very still. When the song ended, his hands were trembling. "Why am I crying?" he asked softly. No one could answer. Far below, the sisters never forgot. They swam often to the place of foam. They sang no more songs at dawn. They no longer rose to the surface for fun. Sometimes the eldest would drift alone to the high balcony and whisper into the wind, "My little sister." And sometimes, just sometimes, the currents would grow warm around her hands. The prince grew old. His hair turned silver. His hands began to shake. One evening, very late in life, he walked alone to the highest balcony. The sea lay dark and endless beneath the stars. For a long time he simply watched the waves, and then, without knowing why, he spoke. "I am sorry," he whispered. The words startled him. He did not know to whom they were meant, but when he said them, the sea grew very still, and she was nowhere and everywhere, Not a spirit, not a soul, not a memory anyone could hold, only a quiet change in the world, a kindness that had happened once and would never happen again. The sea kept her secret, the sisters kept her love, and the prince kept the feeling that something beautiful had passed through his life and was gone forever. Thank you for listening to this retelling of The Little Mermaid. Good night and sleep well.